A few months ago, we were hosting a leadership training right here in New York. At our organization, CitizenWELL, we often begin our gatherings with the question, why are you here? Why are you showing up? And one of our leaders from Virginia, Carlos, a yoga practitioner, neurologist, and Cuban immigrant, said the most telling thing. He said, I realize now that if I want to help change things, unfortunately, I'm going to have to get involved. Well, my political wake-up call was similarly reluctant. It happened on September 20th, 2001. At the time, we still believed over 10,000 to be missing, one of whom was my stepdad, Lieutenant Joe Levy. He was one of the first firemen to respond to the burning buildings, running in and up when so many were running out. And so 9 days later, we piled into my living room, family, friends, neighbors, and we leaned into the TV as the president addressed the nation. The room was stuffy with uncertainty and grief, but we were yearning for answers. How did this happen? What will make this right? But when the president boldly declared retaliation, he said, and I quote, "This will be a war like no other," I recoiled. We had already lost so much. And I knew in a way that I hadn't learned in any textbook that meeting violence with more violence wasn't the answer. I remembered having this unfamiliar feeling in my body. It was alert and upright. And while I didn't understand it at the time, I couldn't deny it. I was different. I'd later discover that feeling was the felt sense of becoming activated. But being political these days is neither pleasant nor popular. And it's no wonder. One could say that the spirit of American politics has been trumped by fanatical politicians and corrupt policies. And while it's easy to point the finger at institutional power for our failing democracy, we rarely talk about the other also broken component of our political system, citizenship. The language of democracy has always included the essential role of citizens. It declared our rights inherent and natural, but it was intended that the American people animate and defend that declaration. There was a responsibility implied in our founding documents that accompanied our privilege, a social pact, so to speak. But after over 200 years of impassioned civic duty, the kind that people fought for, the kind that people died for, things have changed. Since the 1970s, all indicators of civic life have declined. The concept of citizenship, when invoked these days, is reduced to a political debate about immigration laws, voter ID requirements, and building a wall. And we have a right to feel discouraged. Money in politics has enabled a marketplace of democracy that allows our votes to be bought and sold to the highest bidder. Is the system broken? Yes. But not only are we voters treated like consumers, we often act like them. Our what's in it for me mentality conspires to keep us feeling powerless. And it can look like a citizenship from the sidelines, a culture of finger pointing, fair weather voting, and waiting around for someone else to take care of things. But that's not the whole story. While civic engagement is down, self-help is at an all-time high. In the last 20 years, the wellness industry has grown by 1,000%, servicing a movement of self-care, mindfulness, and conscious consumption that impacts over 50 million people in the US today. Many of us here have experienced the profound benefits of these practices and services, and I am no exception. I found yoga at the bottom. After 9/11, it gave me the tools to fall apart and put myself back together again. It gave me meaning in an unimaginable moment. And it gave me a new lease on life, one that was inspired by mantra, fueled by green juice, and adorned in mala beads. I was the living embodiment of the yoga cliche. But while wellness soars, so does inequality. Inequality has been a staple of the so-called American dream for as long as we've had one. A recent study found the US to be both the wealthiest and the most unequal country amongst developed nations. Whether we're looking at child poverty rates or the school-to-prison pipeline or the diabetes epidemic, we, the big we with a capital W, are not well by any indication. And it can be tempting to want to find ourselves in the latest personal practice in healthy lifestyle, in happiness apps and exotic supplements, but we only become more lost and isolated. Our ambitious pursuit of self-care isn't making us better when we're leaving so many behind. The truth is, well-being for some is well-being for none. And what we're left with is what we call the well-being gap. The unequal conditions that determine who gets to be well in this country and who doesn't. I was on the right side of that equation after 9/11, but not everyone was. Have you ever met someone in your life and had this feeling that you were supposed to know them? Well, that's how it was when I met Valerie Kerr in early 2016. But it wasn't until I heard Valerie's story that I knew that mine was about to change. On September 15th, 2001, just 4 days after 9/11, Valerie's uncle, Balbir Sodi, was killed in a hate crime at the gas station that he owned in Phoenix. He had been planting flowers out front to honor those that had been lost just days earlier. He wore a beard and a turban in accordance with his Sikh faith and was shot 5 times by a white man who claimed to act in the name of patriotism. I thought 9/11 was the worst of it, the most unimaginable and devastating loss. But it was just the beginning for Balbir and so many Sikh and Muslim Americans. In the shadow of 9/11, we have given into a culture of retaliation that has enabled policies of discrimination, surveillance, incarceration, and even death. We have witnessed, even allowed, our fellow American citizens to be harassed based on the color of their skin or their religion. And as if losing 2,996 civilians on 9/11 wasn't enough, it is estimated that over 1.3 million people around the world have been killed in the war on terror. Some might say that is the cost of our freedom. But I wonder if that is the price of our fear. Every year on that day, we gather together and we vow to never forget. But are we really remembering when we don't tell the whole story? The one that includes the suffering of so many who have been persecuted since that day. And am I really honoring the memory of the man who raised me, who demonstrated a love for his neighbors every day of his life? He didn't discriminate between who gets to be saved and who doesn't. He ran into that tower for all of us. And so Valerie and I, we shared our stories, 2 heartbreaking versions of the same event. And eventually, our stories became one, woven together in such a way that they could no longer be separate. And 15 years after 9/11, we came together at Ground Zero, the place where it all began. But this time, we brought the memory of Balbir Sodi and the beloved community that has been taken from us since 9/11. And 4 days later, we flew across the country to the gas station that has become known as the second ground zero. And we brought the story of Lieutenant Joe Levy and all of the first responders who gave their life on 9/11. We stood in solidarity, side by side, hand in hand, hearts on the line. Two unlikely allies embodying a revolutionary kind of love that transcended race, religion, and politics. And while it was our suffering that united us, it was our relationship that transformed us. I believe that this is who we are becoming, and it is calling us up to go beyond personal responsibility and self-interest into the messy, complex, and intersectional reality of who we really are in America and how we came to be here. It means recognizing that many of us, non-natives of this country, have benefited from the legacy of colonialism, racism, and free market economics. We can't truly know healing and reconciliation within ourselves until we face the wounds that we have inherited, that we are a part of. And it's hard and uncomfortable and inconvenient, but it is necessary. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of this when he said, "The ultimate measure of a man isn't where he stands in times of comfort and convenience. It's where he stands in times of challenge and controversy." What may seem in this country like a moment of crisis and division is also a moment of healing and solidarity. Together, we are learning that it's not just about claiming our rights to freedom and self-realization. It's about fully embodying our responsibility to one another and the knowing that we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. Even Maslow discovered this eventually, placing transcendence and our commitment to the greater good at the top of his pyramid of needs, above selfhood. What if we thought of politics as a system through which we take care of one another and the whole of society? Then citizenship would be the practice of how we take care of one another. Peter Block defines citizen as one who is accountable for and committed to the well-being of the whole. We need a citizenship of solidarity, one that centers love, justice, and the idea that no one is well unless everyone is well. And it's not solidarity for the sake of other, it's solidarity for the sake of all of us. And it's already happening. We see it reflected in the Black Lives Matter movement that understands that our liberation is bound. And the Fight for 15 campaign, which is uniting around a vision of economic justice where everyone gets to thrive. And the dreamers who believe that we get to belong as citizens of America simply because we are and there is enough to go around. Well-being is only possible with the full participation and realization of all of its parts. And to do that, we need to dismantle the beliefs and the systems that are holding us back and build a new inclusive ecology that transforms our society from the inside out. And here's what it's going to take. We need to show up. We, the people, are the heart of this ecology. And what we believe about ourselves and one another matters. Together, we can reclaim our power as citizens and build a capacity to be both the creators and the stewards of our communities. From there, we need to rebuild the structures that support and sustain our people. A body politic that originates in churches and living rooms, in yoga studios and community centers, where these places become the starting point for change and unite around the country to become a movement of collective care. And we need courageous action in how we come together to disrupt systems of injustice and protect all life on Earth. It looks like peaceful protest, organized boycotts, collective advocacy, and it looks like voting. Voting matters. Who we vote for matters, and how we vote matters. Voting is not the decision you make for your personal well-being or for your bank account even. Voting is collective care. It's how we aggregate our power and voice our vision for the country that we all deserve. This is the practice of citizenship, and it is a constant choice, every moment, every day, not just every 4 years. To show up as our best selves, to fight for one another, and to co-create the systems that enable human potential and well-being for everyone, because everyone deserves to be well. I remember in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, just before the dust had settled, before we got afraid, there was this opening. And in that space, there was no safety, no certainty, no handbook for how we should respond in moments like this. There was just us. All of us, stunned, heartbroken, and awake. And we did the only thing we knew to do. We turned towards one another. We gave blood. We baked casseroles. We planted flowers. We showed up. Rebecca Solnit spoke of the profound power of these moments. She said, an emergency is separation from the familiar, a sudden emergence into a new atmosphere, one that often demands that we ourselves rise to the occasion. We need a citizenship that is rising to the occasion. And it's not the kind of patriotism that puts our love for our country above our love for one another. It's a citizenship of humanity. When I think back to the question we asked Carlos, why are you here? I think the answer for all of us is each other. We are here for each other, period. And our responsibility to one another isn't just a social pact, it's a spiritual pact. We need to trust ourselves and open up to being even more radical. Radical in the way that Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams talks about it, far-reaching and thorough. We need to go beyond the familiar and get radical now in our practice, in our relationships, in our actions, and in our votes. Because how we show up in this moment is going to define who we are as a community and as a country. Thank you.